Welcome to Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Jerome from City of Brookville PD in Ohio. He has 35 years total in law enforcement, and he has spent the last 13 years as Chief of Police. Welcome to the show, Chief Jerome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So we talked a little bit offline. You have spent your entire adult life in law enforcement. You started when you were 18 years old, and now here we are today, 13 years as chief, 35 years total in law enforcement. So can you give us a little bit of background into how you got started as, I'm gonna say a kid. When I hear like 18, I think like you were a little kid when you started in this career. What made you choose law enforcement?
Well, it's kind of an accident. So I started at community college here in Ohio and thought I was going to be an architect and quickly determined that's not what I wanted to do and too much time in the classroom and too much time drawing and stuff after hours. So had a friend that was a deputy sheriff, encouraged me to apply at sheriff's office. Again, had never thought about getting into law enforcement full time. That was never an idea even. Next thing you know, I went through the hiring process. I became a correction officer in February of 1990. And so I was still 18, almost 19, and in a totally different world than I'd ever imagined working in a jail. It was not the jails that you see today. It was a little more dated than what you might see in TV today. But nevertheless, a great environment. We had great people I worked with, and very quickly I realized this is the career field that I should have chosen. I did choose, and it was great. So I did that for probably 5.5 years. I think it was, I left towards the latter part of 95. And probably 40 people in our academy class, which back then was a traditional size. Now it's a lot different,
Yeah.
much smaller. But so we did that, and next thing you know, I'm in the police academy in '93, graduate in '94, still working in the jail. Then I became a part-time officer at City of Brookville, auxiliary, then part-time. And next thing you know, I'm here full-time in 1995, and exciting. I mean, it's a smaller city. Um, I love the community. I love the camaraderie and having the school district, and it was just very, very neat to work here. Still is. Now we're bigger than we were back then, but it was much smaller. So next thing you know, I became a school resource officer as this department's first school resource officer. We'd started a bike patrol when I first became full time, so that was the first bike patrol officer as well. And then I did 3 years as a school officer, then got promoted to sergeant, and then from sergeant to chief. So quickly, I tell people this all the time that you always hear it from the elder officers. They say, before you know it, you're going to be retired, and you think, whatever. It goes very quickly. So I've had a terrific career, and here we are. So I'm retired, rehired, and still love what I do. So I'm still continuing to work.
I agree with you in the sentiment that life just goes by so fast. And when you are young, I think that you don't really have that like forward thinking of like, I'm going to end up being 30, 40, 50, 60. Like when you're in your 20s, it's like you're living day to day and you feel like you have so much time. And then you blink and you're like, wow, where did all the time go? And I think that you you learn. I know you said from the elder officers saying, "Hey, like, hey kid, it's going to go by quick," but I think that sometimes you don't really know that until you're in that position of like how quick it can actually go. And I think when I was in my 20s, no one could tell me any different. But it's so important to plan for the future. If there's anyone who's young listening, it's like plan for the future because it does come before you know it.
And we do a lot of community policing here, so I'm constantly in the community, constantly having events for kids, adults, and seniors. All over the spectrum. But as I see these parents with their toddlers and babies, and even our officers that have small children, I I'm constantly telling them, trust me when I tell you, with having a daughter just graduated from high school, make sure that you spend as much time as you can with them. You think that these moments as a toddler, as they start walking and playing sports and things like that, it's so important to do that.
Yep.
and to carve out that family time. Do not lose track of that because it'll be gone before you know it.
100%. I know when you and I talked to, like throughout your career, you worked a lot of different assignments, and I'm curious what perspectives you were able to gain through working in different areas of the organization, different assignments throughout the organization, and maybe what lessons did you now take with you into this existing role as chief?
Well, I tell people this all the time, and people at the sheriff's office that have done all the assignments as well, and maybe started in the jail. I tell everybody, I think every police officer should have to work in the jail setting for at
Mm.
least a year. Because I'll tell you, the what you learn in the jail from officer safety to basically how to understand different types of people, different cultures, people with mental illness and things of those natures. You're dealing with all types of people in that setting. You're seeing people obviously at their worst. You're seeing people that maybe were in a terrific career and made a bad mistake, and you need to show that empathy and things of that nature. So I will tell you, learning how to speak to people, how to notice their body language and things that you do. You learn so much working in a jail that we find that people, you can't teach that on the street as easily because it takes so long to do that. So, what we might know from working in the jail, um, something that's second nature. These people, some of the new officers may never get that experience, or not for several years. So I think that if you start in the corrections facility and then come to the road, I just think you're a better police officer.
It sounds like it's an immersive experience. Like you kind of you got to learn in real time because you're immersed in it every single day. And one of the things I wrote down that I was going to ask you is, did it teach you empathy and emotional intelligence? And it sounds like it did because that's one of the number one questions I hear a lot from leaders like yourself for like, how do you teach these young kids who maybe don't have that life experience how to have that in their career? As a new officer going out into the community, how do you teach empathy or emotional intelligence if you don't have experience learning those things? And so it sounds to me like this is maybe one way that you could do that.
Yeah, because it's very difficult to do that, but it also for an officer safety thing as well, because when officers a lot of times how they speak to people, how they interact with people. Their first reaction, I think a lot of new officers may come out and then they could be badge heavy or they could think they're going to take the entire world on every day they come to work. Working in a jail puts it in perspective for you because you come across career felons, people that were, now I knew the term as MMA fighters and things like that, and people that fight every day. That's what they do.
Yeah.
So we encourage people to talk your way out of anything if you can, because ultimately there is always those people that are there waiting for a fight. That's a challenge, and there's that group of people that would like to fight with law enforcement officers or kill them.
Yeah.
So it's so important to recognize that body language, recognize behaviors and ultimately learn those interpersonal skills that you can talk your way out of it if you can.
Right. How did you learn to stay positive through that environment? Because one thing that I've heard is that, the negativity doesn't only come from the inmates, but it also comes from maybe your peers in that environment. Was there anything that you did that you were able to keep a positive mindset throughout that time?
Well, it's difficult. I mean, it's difficult because no matter who you're working with, it seems like there's always somebody going through a tragedy in their life, whether you have a coworker that's got a sick child, or maybe they're going through a custody battle or a divorce or another separation, or maybe they've had a death in their family recently. So it's no different than any other workforce. But in some regards, the workforce is smaller. So not only do your coworkers need support, but you find yourself every day seeing these things on every call. You constantly are seeing family issues and custody battles and these kids that are torn apart either by the parents and domestic violence or even child abuse and drug use and things like that. So those things, when officers see that, obviously that's difficult on them, and you have to determine how you're going to deal with that. because eventually it does wear on you. You get a little more hard to that, I guess. But on the flip side of the coin, um, you see it just about every day that you go to work, really.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that it is. I mean, we'll talk a little bit about wellness and some of the strategies because I know you've had some strategies throughout your career that have helped you too. But, I think it is difficult, but it takes that awareness and then practice in certain ways to be able to offload those things and not let yourself spiral down when everything around you seems to be negative. Like trying to find some of the positivity in that, but then also being able to disconnect from that, which I know is maybe one of your secrets. But before we jump in there, I wanted to ask you because 13 years as a chief is a really long time. And I think there's a lot of stats out there that, chiefs maybe only make it a few years before they retire. So, what is the secret to making it 13 years as a chief?
Being open-minded, I'll tell you that, because I think that every new chief that takes over a department, their first goal is to do it their way. And maybe they didn't like things that were done by the prior chief, or maybe two chiefs, three, who knows. But I think the biggest success that I've had is listening to the staff, the officers, and the civilians to say that if they have a good idea, that's a good idea, and I give them their name to it. So,
Mm.
you know, I think so many times leaders make that mistake because it has to be their idea or it's not a good idea unless they do that, and that's not true. My goal immediately was, what are we doing that doesn't make sense?
Mm.
What are we doing that if we stop doing this today would make your life better, make you happier, make you want to come to work more often, and those type of things. Now, some things aren't positive, obviously. I mean, sometimes you have to do things for liability purposes or maybe based on policy, but there's times where policies sometimes don't make sense. Sometimes you have to get rid of that policy. Sometimes policies have been there forever, and you ask, I wonder why this has ever been there. And they tell you, well, I don't know. It's always been done that way. Well, that doesn't mean you can't change it. And so I think that's what we have done throughout the 13 years intermittently. I mean, there's times where you go through ebbs and flows, you go where society deems what policies you have based on, unfortunately, when police officers make horrible decisions in another state, sometimes that has a trickle effect across the country.
Yeah.
We've seen that when somebody, especially typically that's done with use of force or maybe a use of deadly force where it's questionable or that happens. And then again, your staff then goes on calls and goes on positive calls or does foot patrols, and they're constantly hearing the negativity they see in the news about, hey, I can't believe this officer in Missouri or wherever did that, or whatever state they decide to name that, wherever the officer was from. So I think part of the job of a chief is to keep them as positive as you can and learning lessons from that. But I think sometimes you can throw so much at the troops that you want them to go out and do a great job every day. But on the flip side of that coin, you can overtrain them too, to where you're like, okay, there's a hot button topic today, so I need you to sit down and do 2 hour training on that. And then 2 days from now, there's another hot button topic. Just to do another 2 hours. So I think you have to space that out. I think you have to not overwhelm the staff and the officers because you want them to be prepared, you want them to be trained. But on the flip side of the coin, I think you can overdo it.
Yeah. No, I really like the idea of challenging your thought process and asking yourself, how can we do better? Because I think that a lot of times we kind of get stuck in the ways that we typically do things without that like self-assessment of why are we doing things this way? How can we improve and how can we be better? And I think the collective is always stronger than an individual. If you have different perspectives, different walks of life, different ways of thinking about things, it's only going to make the whole better and stronger because you're able to maybe consider things that you never thought of. I personally love that. I love when someone comes up to me and challenges me a little bit and asks me like, why did you do it that way? And for me to and I think this is through learned experience. I'm sure you've learned this over time too, and to not like be defensive about that and just be like, I wonder why I did it that way. And if you don't know the answer why, maybe thinking about, is there a way to do it better? If someone has a suggestion on how to do it better, can you consider that? And maybe sometimes it's not, but even just having that open mind to consider different ways of thinking, I think is a really powerful skill to have.
Well, I think it does better for your organization too. So
Yeah.
when you include other people's thoughts, whether it be mid-level management or it's the officer, whether they're a veteran officer or a new officer, that I think that everybody has new perspective. Um, they like different types of trainings. They have different interests within our business. So I think that's neat too. You know, you have some people that want to be on crime scenes. You have people that are interested in traffic. Some people that are interested in community policing. Not every police officer wants to get into community policing, you know.
Yeah.
So everybody has a different knack, if you will, or a different skill set. So what I like about our department being smaller is you can't have 12 of me, you can't have 12 of the next person, you can't have everybody the same personality because that would never work. So I
Yeah.
think a mixture of people with different interests is a very positive thing.
Well, and just remembering that everyone has value, and
Right.
I think that like you can learn from everybody. You can learn from the homeless person at the bus stop down the street, and you can learn from, a new officer and an older officer, retired, like you can learn from everybody. And I think having that mindset is really important because the moment that you stop learning, you stop growing, right? And sometimes we learn from the negative things too, and using that as an opportunity to do better. So I always try to keep that in mind. I try to be trainable and teachable and know that everyone has value and I can learn something from everybody.
Well, and I know this happens not just in the state of Ohio, but across the country. Laws change daily, weekly, monthly, and annually. They all change.
Mhm.
So I can just tell you that what I know to be maybe a rules of evidence that I learned in the police academy in 1994, those have changed.
Mm.
So there may be something if I read a police report or I think, oh man, that doesn't seem right. I'll go down the hallway and I'll say, hey, can I ask you a quick question? Did that change? Is the reason we're allowed to do that now or not allowed to do that? You might miss something that we try to filter out as much as we can and send it to the troops on law updates. And I'm pretty into all that as
Yeah.
far as updates go. But every now and then there's a traffic law. They'll be like, Chief, that's not how they do it anymore. You can't do that anymore and things like that. So, and that's okay. I
Yeah.
would rather them educate me if I forgot or didn't see that something specifically was changed on some different traffic laws or something. But yeah.
Yeah. Who are you outside of this career?
Well, that's changed throughout the 35 years as well, too, you know. I would tell you that the younger in your career you are, everybody seems to eat and sleep and everything, the badge, the job, the career. And I will tell you, I think that's why we have a higher divorce rate. I think we have stuff like that. Not to say people don't make bad decisions too, that leads to it too, but I would say that I think that the more you find that although your job's important and we love our communities that we work for and things like that, you still have to have that time where you dedicate some free time to just you because we have, some of the most uh, officers that are the most active, they're in court constantly.
Mm.
So they get burnout and they constantly are like, oh, it's my day off and I'm going back to court. So they really don't have days off. Or if they have 2 or 3 days off in a row, they might be in court, one, two, or three of those. You never know. So having that break of finding something to do, an outlet other than just waiting to go back to work. So many times I just, I feel sorry for some people. I go to a store and I know they're a police officer. You can tell they're a police officer. We can tell who each other are and they've still got their work boots on with a pair of jeans and they're with their families just and they may have a certain belt on that they may wear at work too there or something that definitely is something where they just feel that they're still working and there's some guys and again there's pros and cons to all these things but and some people have to carry a gun everywhere they go even on or off duty and not on duty but off duty
Mhm.
and when I tell people that, I'm like, you have to have that separation. I'm not getting into an officer safety thing. I'm not getting into the battle of who does what and when and where. But I've always been one that probably, carry a gun off duty, maybe, 20% of the time. I don't know. But
Yeah.
but some people are not like that, and that's okay. But I also encourage people to have that separation, especially at home. Personally, I will say that my entire career, When I got off duty, the uniform went into a closet. I don't have 10 thin blue line flags hanging around my house. I don't have the doormats that have police officers on them. I don't have, and I'm not saying that's negative when you do have some of those things. I just think that sometimes people do not have a separation, and home is where they're supposed to have that separation. They
Mhm.
have their family, they have children that look up to them, they have all these things, but I think sometimes people cannot separate that from their work life to their home life. And that I think is one of the biggest troubles that our career faces.
Yeah. How do you think that it affects the family by not being able to shut it off and disconnect and be home when you're home and always have this sense of, waiting to go back to work or feeling like you're still at work and having that hypervigilance? Like, how do you think that that impacts the family unit?
What's not good, and I've been in that boat. So I tell you, as I changed over 35 years, I can remember the times where I was working at just a tremendous amount of overtime or working these private details or second jobs, still in a security atmosphere, but yet not, full time. And you do get the kids that'll tell you, man, I miss you being home. I just want to go out back and play. And the next thing you know, no, I can't. I've got to be at this other job or I've got to work overtime. I'll try to catch up and try to be at your game. One of the things that really impacted me probably, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, I saw an article one time written by a child basically as they became an adult that said one of the things that they enjoyed the most in their athletic career was looking over in the stands and always seeing their parent sitting in the stands watching their sporting event. So
Mhm.
this article really went into detail about how that affects kids emotionally when you're never there, when
Yeah.
you don't go to these sporting events and you don't go to these school events, and the peer pressure these kids affect when they have a science fair and mom or dad that's in law enforcement's never there. Now that's not always mom or dad's fault. They could be on a shift and maybe don't have the seniority, maybe don't have time off, and they're unable to go to some of these sporting events or these school events. So unfortunately, it's not the parents' fault at times, but sometimes it is. Sometimes it is the parents get so into either the money aspect or the special assignments that take that maybe the special assignments more important than their family. And quickly, those officers are the ones that I think that end up in divorce, that end up with family problems because when the spouse is saying, "Hey, you missed this is your fifth Thanksgiving in a row," and come to find out, they probably could have been home the last three, but they found out, hey, it's double time, and
Yeah.
they would rather work that Thanksgiving and they, in fact, missed dinner. So I think that wears negatively on the families. We see that quite a bit.
Yeah. I really like the concept that you said earlier about trying to be as present as possible as you can. Like maybe you can't control some of the shifts or if you're on call or, whatever it is that, maybe comes with the job that you're not necessarily choosing. Like maybe you're not choosing overtime, but somehow you still have to, end up being there because you're short staffed or whatever the case may be. But when you are home, you're home and you're trying to be as present as possible. You're trying to make it a priority to be there. And I really like the idea that you said that you have a closet where everything goes into, and then mentally you're able to like have that separation. And I've had other people on this podcast, and anyone who's listening who maybe hasn't heard those, there were other strategies that were very similar that I've heard of, like put it in your locker, change out when you get there into your uniform when you get home, change out before you go back home. Or there was like a tree that someone put their hand on, like right before they walked in their door, of like, okay, now I'm entering into my home life. And so having those mental strategies of saying, okay, I'm going to turn this off now so that I can be as present as I possibly can outside of the job to be able to decompress. Because if you're not doing that, if you're not having the opportunity to have that separation, then you're in this constant state of thinking about work, of stress, of, all the things that come with it. And so having that ability to shut it off, I think is really important. So I like that strategy of like, I have a closet, I put it in there. I don't have anything around my house that reminds me that I'm a police officer so that I can be as present as possible with my family.
And I try to tell people it's not that I am so proud to do what I do. I'm so
Yeah.
proud to be a police officer and have been and have had a successful career. But on the flip side of that coin, I've also made a lot of mistakes too. So now that I've made those mistakes, those as we talk to new officers, I can say, listen, I see that you're working a ton of overtime. I see that you're doing this, and just be careful, be cautious. Make sure you're going to your kids' things. Make sure you're helping your wife out if she just had a baby. Make sure that you keep her mentally strong because ultimately, if she's not mentally strong, you're going to have problems there too. But the most important thing is I tell people whether it's a male officer or a female officer, your spouse has to be on the same page you are for your career because we have a career like nobody else. In that there's a tremendous amount of stress. You see a lot of negative things. You see a lot of death. You see dead bodies. You see crashes. You do death notifications. I mean, there's a lot of things that we do that are very impactful on us in general. Well, I tell new officers, make sure you have those talks with your spouse. And they say, what do you mean? There has to be a conversation that you have with your spouse, male or female, that says, listen, if I tell you that I had this horrible crash and somebody died today in my arms that was 13 or 12 or 20 or whatever,
Yeah.
you need to either give me that space that I might need. And I know that we had plans to go shopping. I know that we planned on doing something today. I know that we were going to your sister's or whatever. But I'm not going to go, and here's why. I need an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours to decompress. I don't think a lot of police officers over the years until now, when people are talking about mental health and trying to be as healthy as we can be, I don't think we had those conversations, and maybe we did, but I can tell you, 35 years ago, I don't remember having that conversation with my first wife. And there's going to be things that you see that you need to either debrief with yourself, with your spouse, with a staff member, with a supervisor, maybe, because ultimately in our career, that wasn't a cool thing to tell somebody, oh man, that really bothered me, or man, I can't believe that happened. There's phone numbers now that not only police officers can call, but any citizen can call if they're having negative thoughts or they see something pretty traumatic.
Yeah.
So we have to stay as healthy as we encourage the public to stay. I mean, there's options for crime victims out there. There's options for everybody. So we tell officers, you have this ability too. You can be a victim too. When you get assaulted or somebody shoots at you, you're chasing somebody, you get injured, you're now a victim as well. So I think sometimes people just took that for granted. It's just part of the job. Well, it may be part of the job, that's true, but you still have to try to stay as healthy as you can for your family's sake
Yeah.
in the process.
I really truly believe that there's so much power in communication and talking about things, but I also agree with you that that's easier said than done, and it's a hard thing to talk about, and effective communication is tough in general, even just like what you said with the family, saying, hey, like, I understand, like validating them first, being like, I understand this was important to you. I understand that we had plans. Here's what I went through. This is what I need. That is really healthy, effective communication. That's really hard to teach, especially for young people. But I think even in the context of wellness, being able to talk about things and say, hey, like that incident really impacted me, or I'm really struggling right now and I need resources. And, we have this conversation a lot about how do you break past that barrier? How do you get people comfortable talking about things? How do you get people comfortable reaching for resources if and when they need them? And, you said this to me as like the barrier of like saying, I'm fine. How do you in leadership get past that and encourage people to take action in their own lives?
Well, here's what I do, and my officers would tell you I've done this, I don't know how many times. I think it's important when I hear about a situation or a car crash with serious injuries or a suicide or a traumatic incident. I think sometimes people try to do things in too formal of a environment.
Mm.
So I will meet that officer in the hallway as they're walking to the bathroom or getting a cup of coffee, and I'll say, "Hey, come here a minute." And they'll be like, "Yeah, what's up, Chief?" And I'll say, "Hey, last night you were on that call. That sounded like that was pretty dramatic. You all right?" And they'll give me that, "Yeah, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine." And then you tell them, are you sure? Seriously, if you need time, you need to talk to somebody, you need something, my phone's always on. You can call me 24 hours a day. They all have my cell phone number. And I mean, you're like family. We spend more time with our fellow officers than we do with our family.
Hmm.
And most police officers don't get that, but they do. And we are with our coworkers awake, for that 8 hour shift, that 12-hour shift, that 16-hour shift. Typically at home, you're not with your spouse during a waking time for that 8, 10, 12 hours a day. If you're lucky, maybe on a day off, maybe.
Hmm.
And you're definitely not with your kids that many hours, whether they're at sleep, school, sporting event. So it's important for us to watch each other to make sure that, I've had officers come say, hey, well, you better check up on whatever. They kind of had an emotional dump afterwards, which that's okay. You want them to have that. I tell officers all the time, if you've got to go home and you've got to cry or you've got to bust loose, then you need to do that because once you do that, you're going to be way better off.
Yeah.
Don't hold it all in. It's not a macho thing. But again, in our profession, it's always been a macho thing. But I think as suicide rates have climbed in law enforcement and they continue to climb, that the more we talk about it, the more it's okay to talk about it, the more it's okay to say that really bothered you or something like that. I think the more positive we're going to be, and we want to see that number drop. I mean, that's the ultimate goal. And these type of podcast, we hope somebody watches it. We hope say, man, exactly what the chief just said is what I experienced yesterday on this call. And I went home and my wife asked me what happened at work, and I told her nothing. And I didn't even explain what happened. Now, I will tell you, there's times where you don't want to discuss it when you get home. Or you tell your spouse or a family member you live with, hey, I had a bad day at work. I'll talk about it after I wake up. I'm going to go home and go to bed, or I'm going to do whatever. So those happen. But again, like you talked about communication, just tell your spouse it's not you. It's not something that happened. I'm not mad at you. I'm not whatever, but I had a really bad day at work and here's why. So
Yeah.
I think then they understand, okay, then I need to give him a break today.
Hmm.
Um, and that I think that's positive for the relationship too.
I agree. And, I've had to learn this through my many years of life too. I don't think I ever came out the gate perfect with this, but I think that with a partner, it has to be team. Like you have to see each other as on the same team. And the moment there's a divide of like, they won't understand or I'm not going to do this, and you're starting to shut them out and they're not, like you said, on the same page or on that same track as you, that's when things become really challenging because we know that when you're going through a hard time, especially if you tend to isolate, that's even more isolating for you and for your partner. And so I think if you can sit down during the good times, not when you're having the hard stuff, right? And try to establish systems. You guys are so good at planning and training for things and preparing for things, and if you know that there are things that are going to happen throughout your career that are going to be really traumatic, really hard, um, you know that that's the reality, then how can you proactively train to communicate within your household after one of those situations? How can you prepare for if and when you need the space or if and when you need to talk to them about XYZ? And so, what I've learned to do is try to prepare for the worst case scenario during the best times, the best timing. Like, don't try to prepare for it. In the hard time or after the hard time, it's like, what is our procedure if something like this happens? Is there a code word that we use? Is there a system that we have in place where we say, hey, we're going to take 2 hours away from each other and then we're going to come back together at the dinner table and we're going to sit and we're going to talk about anything? So what are those procedures that you can set up in advance to set you up for success in the future?
And I know it's difficult. I know there are law enforcement officers that are married to other law enforcement officers, and they clearly know what their spouse is going through. But then you have the people that are married where you get married and they know you have a dangerous job. They know you could be killed and not come home and things of that nature. But on the flip side of that coin, you also have normal life. It's nothing against your spouse, but you may have a spouse that has no law enforcement experience, has never known a police officer. So when you tell them stuff happened, they're just absolutely flabbergasted. They're like, I can't believe you just, I didn't know there are people in our community like that. There are in every community. So again, communication is important. But I will tell you, the more we talk to our fellow officers and the more we are there to support each other, and critical incidents are the worst. What drives me crazy at times is when uh, I want to see police officers have the same relationship with every police officer in the world that they do, unfortunately, when they go to a fallen officer's funeral.
Yeah.
Because you'll never see camaraderie like that. And you see the hundreds or thousands of police officers showing up and showing their respect and showing the camaraderie for the fallen officer. And then it's like when they get back to work, they just it's you see the breakdown of the brotherhood, sisterhood, things like that, that they kind of go from one extreme one day to back to whether it be bickering, fighting, whatever the next day. But if we would stick to that, stick to the camaraderie, I think it would be better too. So you have that officer. I think officers are doing better with that. They go to a shooting, they go to a suicide. I think officers are pulling them aside quicker, especially ones with experience and saying, "Are you okay? I know that was a lot, but is there anything I can do for you?" And typically it's no, 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 no. But we every city, every department now offers counseling. It's all paid for. There's so many different resources now, so many books, so many different things. But when we talked about what outlets do you do, I know we kind of got off that a little bit.
Yeah.
I tell you, this is what I think you should do. I mean, personally, what helped me over the years, because I've been through, several things where I think I've made mistakes and then I wanted to improve on them. I tell people, regardless of money, regardless what situation you're in, carve out that time for your family and your kids and maybe set a goal. If it's 2 hours a day, an hour a day, on your day off, you have 3 days off or 2 days off. What 4 hours maybe are you going to take your kid to the park? Something that doesn't cost any money. It doesn't have to cost money. Or what can you do? Kids just want adults' attention. They don't care where you go. They don't care if you're sitting in the middle of an empty room with some toys. They just want mom or dad. And if they don't get attention as they get older, they're going to get attention from somebody else, and it's not going to be a positive attention.
Yep.
So I tell them, be as positive as you can, be involved in your kids' lives as you can, and take the vacations. If you're working overtime, save, take that vacation, go out of the state, leave your phone, because I will tell you, the biggest problem we have today in society, I complain about it every day, is social media. Our
Mm.
phones and social media. It ruins marriages, it ruins careers. It's just they're horrible. And I forget what the syndrome is called that people have to check their phones every certain period of time and they're always constantly checking Facebook and text messages. In fact, we all have that problem as leaders. I mean, our people do it at work every day. And I get that. I do it. It's not just their fault. We all do.
Mm.
We are all constantly on our phones, whether it be right or wrong, it happens. So I tell them to carve out that time, find audio. I think I found audiobooks were awesome.
Yeah.
So I would do audiobooks. If I had some downtime, day off, I would do an audiobook. Next thing you know, they read to you, you're done with a book in hours versus. And I think whether it be working out, whether it be hiking, I know so many officers now that some are runners, some are hikers, some like to read, some like to go on vacation, some are in motorcycles, some are into fast cars and things and collectible cars. So everybody has hobbies. And I think the ones that you see that are most successful are the ones that do carve out that time for family time, for their own time, that they can leave that job there at work and they can come home and have a real life when they leave and take off that uniform.
Yeah. I've been thinking about the same thing recently because I didn't know it was like actually diagnosed or that it was coined something, but um, I think anyone listening to this can relate to that, where you are on social media and you blink and it's been an hour and you've just been scrolling the whole time and you wasted an hour. There was nothing beneficial. I've had this happen a number of times where I'm like, did I learn anything? Did I improve as a human? Did I grow? Did anything happen in that time that was at all positive? And for me, it wasn't. It was escaping, it was numbing. It was like that addictive scrolling action that happens. And I had my phone die the other day, and it hasn't died in a really long time. I think when we were younger, our phones would die all the time. Like I remember like when I was in high school, like, and this was before social media. This was before like we were like really on our phones all the time. Like we just had it for like kind of emergencies, and still had analog texting or, whatever. And my phone would die all the time. And I was still able to get in touch with my friends somehow. I was still able to like have a social life, but I wasn't tied to my phone. And the other day, my phone died for like maybe 4 or 5 hours, and it was really nice. It was so nice to like have space to like ask yourself, what do I want to do? Like, what could I do right now that's productive or fun or, not just sitting there numbing out on your phone for hours and hours and hours. And one of the things that I hear all the time, and I'm going to push back on this until the day I die, is I don't have time. I don't have time for wellness. I don't have time to take care of myself, and it's like you do have time. Maybe you're really busy. I understand. We're all really busy. Like we talked about this before. Like I work 7 days a week. I still try to carve out like time multiple times a week for my wellness and things that I need to do, but I work 7 days a week. Sometimes I'm working 15, 18-hour days. So like I understand being busy, but we do have time. It's the prioritization of our time. And so if you can shut it off, I think to your point, that is so ideal. It's so nice when you're not tied to your phone and like numbing out on social media or like inundated by texts and emails.
Well, I tell people, and like you said, putting down the phone is huge.
Hmm.
If you have kids and your parents and you're listening to this podcast, put down your phone when you're having your kid time because chances are you're not.
Yeah.
Your child is talking to you. They're trying to, even from a toddler all the way up as teenager, they're trying to tell you something, and you're sitting there. It drives me crazy. And I do the same thing. You go to a restaurant and there's four people at a table, two parents, two children, and they're all looking at their phones and not even speaking at dinner. That's what society is now. That's not good. We're all doing it. We see it happen every day. We catch ourselves. We had a temporary rule years back with our teenagers, don't bring your phones to the table. That lasted about a week. Then they started sneaking them back, and because they couldn't wait to see what their friends were saying, they couldn't go for 15 minutes without knowing what their friends were doing. And most things that are on social media are negative. I tell people it's not a positive thing. People don't put, well, some people put positive comments, and believe it or not, most of those aren't even true. But a lot of the negative things you see on Facebook are horrible. They're telling you that somebody passed away, something horrible happened to their family. They're telling you that they're going through a financial crisis or a medical crisis. And that, in some cases, is way that they're expressing their feelings. In some cases, that's their outlet, and sometimes they do receive positive feedback that could help them.
Yeah.
But a lot of times, it really, there's days where, my gosh, I'm thinking, what a depressing day. I've seen negative, 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 negative on all these things. And why on God's name do I keep scrolling down through this thing?
Right.
Because it's not a positive thing. So phones are probably the biggest complaint that we have. Um, we have so much technology, so many things that could help officers in crisis. But on the flip side, I mean, they go through their phones and Facebook, and my gosh, if they weren't depressed when they left work and they start scrolling, they're going to be before they go to bed because there's probably 75-25 at most days of negative versus positive. So, and
Yeah.
and one thing that we talked about, I know off air that one thing I think that I've done much better in my career, and I tell young people this all the time: listen to understand versus listening to respond. Because even on duty, we'll be on a call with a complainant, a person that's a crime victim, a person that does something. Before they can finish telling a story, we're interrupting them.
Yep.
And we're not listening to the whole story. So then they get frustrated. They write a statement, maybe do a quick statement or tell us something. And another officer or detective may go back and follow up with that person. They'll say, why didn't you tell the officer that took the original report that? Well, they didn't give me an opportunity. I was telling my story. They interrupted me. They sped up the process. They handed me a statement and said, we're out of here. There's no crime. There's no whatever. You're not going to be able to prove this in court. And they just end that. Well, if they'd have sat and listened to the person a little longer, listening to understand versus listening to respond, I think I've done much better at that over the years because I was that person. I'd stop them dead in their tracks. I'd interrupt them. I'd interrupt family members. I still do at times. I'm sure I do. My family will see this and say, "Oh my God, he still does it." But with that said, that has been a big thing. Now that I understand that I had that problem at times, and now I listen to the whole sentence before I speak, I think it's much healthier. I've learned a lot more, and I think that if more people in society did that, for instance, with we talk about the officer, "Hey, are you okay?" "Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm all right, chief." "All right, see ya." And then you walk down the hall because you took their response. You didn't really push them that much. And I'm not saying you overdo it, but maybe soak that in. I've had officers that said they were okay, and then I still stand there and I wait, and they're like, "But it did really suck, chief. It was terrible, and this is
Mhm.
why." So see, they gave you a little bit more. But if I'd have said, "Oh, he said he was okay," and I walked down the hall and that was it, I didn't give him an opportunity to say much more, but I was telling maybe our mid-level supervisors, "Oh, Johnny said he was okay," or, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I think by doing that, we can hear more and understand more and help people more.
I agree. And I think that it all circles back to everything that we said before, effective communication. And part of that is listening. In order for you to communicate with someone and to understand and to be effective, you also have to understand what they're saying, and I'm guilty of that too. I've definitely done that a lot where I'm just like interrupting people. I'm thinking about my response already. They're talking, I'm not really listening to what they're saying. I'm just trying to figure out how I'm going to respond to what they're saying instead of, like you said, trying to understand. The other thing too is, and I want to circle back to the social media part being negative, our thoughts are already mostly negative. If you do any sort of research, 90% of our thoughts are negative and they're repetitive. And so we need to rewire our brains to be more positive, especially if you're inundated in a negative environment already. If you're having a lot of calls for service that are negative and you're exposed to this negativity from an outside perspective, your brain is already looking for negative things. And so we need to be able to shift our perspective and start thinking about more positive things, having more positive outlets, more positive experiences with our loved ones, with the community, the things that we say being more positive, and being more supportive. And so I think it all circles back to wellness of how can we communicate effectively with each other? How can we be more present in our lives? How can we try to encourage more positivity in our lives and get rid of some of the negativity if we can? And I know you've given a ton of advice. I feel like this whole podcast was just really, really great nuggets of advice. But I do want to ask the final question of what words of wisdom would you share with someone earlier in their career? Maybe something that you wish you would have known earlier or something that's helped you along the way.
I would say one of the biggest things that I would say is as the younger you are before the family start and you start having children and wanting the bigger house or wanting the nicer car. I think education's huge, and I didn't do that at first. I went from thinking degrees were just stupid or whatever, and now, having a couple master's degrees and my PhD work's done, and I didn't finish my dissertation, but I started it. And I'm not saying you need to go to that level, but I'm saying get an associate's degree, get that education, get something you're going to need eventually to get into supervision at some departments and education does better you anyway. It helps you be a better writer. It helps you be a more critical thinker. It does. And I tell you, so start education early, start saving early, get into these investment things from day one. There's going to be a million options they can do that. I watch some people that retire and they've got just tons of money. And then I see some that retire that have no money.
Mm,
So, but again, that could be things that happen throughout their career. But I would tell them your job is important. Give your department 110%. But your department gives you days off for a reason.
mhm,
And money, don't let money control you because if well, yeah, but chief, I can work all three of my days off. Well, now they've went if they did a 6-day cycle, they went from a 12-day, with 3 days in between to now, the 15-day straight cycle before they get their 3 days off. And I don't care how mentally or physically strong you are, and trust me, we have them both that think they're the both and are best of both worlds. But you work 15 days straight, and a lot of those are 10, 12, 16-hour shifts. you're not going to be mentally focused to do the best job you can do for your community and your family. So if you come home tired, you're grumpy, your spouse has had a bad day, your kids have had a bad day, and the next thing you know, you've had a bad day, that's just not a great situation for the house. So although we do have a lot of stress, we can turn that into positive things if we know how to deal with it. And those are some of the things that I would tell young officers, and take vacations often if you can. Um, at least one or two a year, or a weekend, or a night away. Something doesn't have to cost a lot of money, but just carve out that time for your family, and you will be one of the success stories, not one that maybe has several divorces under their belt for a variety of reasons. If you can stay married the entire time, that's wonderful. You should try to do that.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it so much. And like I said before, I feel like that there were so many nuggets for wellness and longevity. And so I appreciate you very much. Thank you for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
Of course.